For more Magic the Gathering resources, check out my friends at paperchampion.net and Kitchen Table MTG.
Hey everybody, this is Tao at The Forge, and before I begin my video today, I just want to give a shout out to all my supporters and subscribers out there who've been really kind of giving me advice and support, both on Twitter and through Facebook and through YouTube. I think it's really hard sometimes to run a channel, especially when you're a small channel. I mean, the smaller channels like mine don't make a ton of money, and sometimes it's difficult for small-time producers to want to keep good things going. And it's really you guys, the people who are out there who enjoy my content and who give that positive feedback that really help. So thanks to you guys. I really do appreciate it. And all these videos I make are really just for you guys. So thanks again. So anyways, today I wanted to talk to you guys about net decking. Now, this is something that, I've kind of tried to ignore for a while, but it seems like this is an increasingly discussed thing in the MTG world. Now, one of the biggest people that talks about this is Desolator Magic, and, I think that, Desolator Magic is kind of really extreme and kind of, unfair in how he talks about net deckers. And I think that I'll talk more about what I think later on specifically about that. But first of all, I think I should describe what I mean by a net decker. So what I mean when someone's net decking, I mean just someone who's using an archetype or a deck list that they found online. Now, this is different than a lot of other people's idea of net decking, where someone's copying a deck that was recently top 8'd at a tournament, and where they're just hoping to win with that top 8 deck. That's not usually a good idea because basically that's an old deck that people have won with, and everybody who's coming to the next tournament are going to bring something that's going to be beating that. So, usually it's not a good idea to play one of those. But anyways, what I want to talk about is the people who actually just get ideas from the internet or just get deck lists from the internet. So you can go to like MTG Goldfish or many other places, like even some of the people who I support, like Kitchen Table MTG or paperchampion.net. Those places, you can find like different deck lists and different ideas for decks and stuff like that. I think there's kind of an unfair bias towards them. Now, here's the thing. I've noticed a lot of times online where players, as soon as they see you're playing anything that remotely resembles a net deck or like a pre-constructed deck, they immediately get really salty and start harassing you online, like saying you're not creative, that you just want to win and stuff like that. Now, this doesn't happen so often, but it happens enough that I've noticed it, and it seems to be getting worse. And first of all, I don't think people should generally do that. Like, if you don't want to play against your opponent, it's not like this is for money or anything. You could just like drop out, right? If you don't want to play that, if you don't want to play against that archetype, then just concede the match and just say whatever. It's not like you're gonna go for a Grand Prix and your record really matters. So anyways, but here's the thing. People that download or just are playing archetypes that they find online sometimes just enjoy playing archetypes. Like, for instance, Kevin at Rogue Deck Builder really likes playing Soul Sisters. It's not that it's the most competitive deck. It's just a fun one to play. I really like playing, Mill. That's actually one of my favorite decks, and Mill is by far not the most competitive one. These are just fun archetypes to play. And I think that it's the same as buying like a pre-constructed commander deck or a dual deck or something like that, where it's just, a cool thing that you don't have to put together. And it's not that you are lazy, but sometimes it's just you can't really do better than what that person who made that has already done, right? So like if you look at my mill deck video, you can't really make a mill deck better than that, or not that I can see anyways. Like those weren't really my ideas. So if I want to play mill, I'm pretty much going to have to play it with that deck list. So anyways, I enjoy playing archetypes, and sometimes I like to make my own decks, as but sometimes I don't. And a lot of times, like, I joke around that sometimes it's late at night, I got maybe 25 minutes left before I want to go to bed, and I'll just play mill because you don't have to really think that much in it. It's not like a totally cerebral game, and it can be played relatively quickly. Same thing if you play burn, right? Burn, like there is still thinking that goes into it, but it's a relatively fast game, like one way or the other when you're playing burn. So sometimes it's just good to play those archetypes depending on what you like. Another thing is that this is an idea that I think is really important, is that playing a net deck or even looking at a net deck helps you to understand what a tuned deck looks like. So when you're first putting together a deck, you can see some synergies here and there, but it's hard to really see what a real tier 1, polished deck really looks like. Right, especially with its, with the number of lands, with the type of win conditions that it might have, with the synergy between the cards, how many cards are just used to disrupt your opponent versus how many are used to enhance or establish your game plan, and so on and so forth. Even the sideboarding is important, to look at that. And by studying these net decks, you can really understand how this deck is, how a really good deck is meant to function. It doesn't mean you have to play them, but it means that it gives you a chance to really see kind of the perfect form so that your future decks can look like that. So you'll say okay, well, how is it that elves can get away with playing 18 lands? How is it, or why is it that this other deck needs 36 lands or something like that? Or why is it that, there's only one Obedazat Ghost Council in this other deck or something like that? It's hard to understand that when you're a new player, but looking at a net deck really kind of helps you to get why that's the case. Now, another thing is that a lot of people think that people who play these pre-constructed decks don't really need any skill to play them. Right? Though if you're playing, I've heard people say, if you play mill, you don't need any skill. Well, that's not really true. Milk is actually a race, and there's a lot of actual decisions about mulliganing, or perhaps what card to play, or even sideboarding choices, that will really determine whether or not you can win or lose. Recently, I wish I had recorded this match. It was actually pretty sweet. I was playing basically against a burn deck. My opponent beat me in the first match. I won in the second match because they mainly got mana screwed, and then in the third match, I was down to 4 life, and I managed to get my opponent down. And then they started. They got down to I think 8 cards left in their library, and then they started chastising me in the chat. Saying I should watch my life more, I shouldn't let myself get so low and stuff like that. I'm okay, first of all, I'm a mill deck. I can't really prevent my life from going down. I'm just basically racing. But it was funny because I was holding up open mana, and I actually had a Crypt Incursion in hand. So my opponent said, well, because you played so foolishly, you're going to lose now. And I was no, I won't. And so then they cast their spell. It was I forget exactly what spell. It was enough to do 8 damage or something, and I countered with Crypt Incursion and went up to 70 life or something like that. It was awesome, and then they just dropped the game. That was actually pretty sweet. But nonetheless, playing mill or even burn or things like that still require quite a bit of thinking. For instance, let's say you're playing burn and a person drops an elf. Okay, do you bolt it or not bolt it? Or do you wait to get a pyroclasm down? Or do you wait for an anger or something like that? It's not that easy sometimes, because if you don't do it at the right time, then you're really going to, you might miss your chance, and then you'll just lose. Right? I've even had people say that Lantern Control is a no thinking deck, when in fact, if you've ever played Lantern Control, it's actually one of the most difficult decks to pilot. It's because you don't get the lock on your opponent right away, and so you have to know what your opponent's playing so that you know what's really important to them and what's not important to them, right? So, I mean, of course, if you get a nut draw on it and your opponent gets mana screwed or something, then yeah, sure. But that's the same with any other deck. So, playing these archetypes, these pre-constructed decks, does require quite a bit of skill to play and to understand the synergies and things that you can do with them. And if you don't understand it, you can make a mistake and it could just be a mess. To give an example, I have Saffron Olive's Owling Mine mill deck, but before I play it, I've never played it before, but before I do, I have to go back and actually watch all his videos again to see exactly what the synergies are and how to play it, and then I have to study it again, just to see how are these cards meant to work together. Anyways, let's move on. The next thing is that sometimes people think that you are at a total advantage because you're playing one of these pre-constructed decks. That's not always the case. Yes, you are an advantage in that you're playing a tuned deck, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a tier 1 deck, for one. The other thing is that your opponent will know exactly what you're playing. Like, for instance, if I put down like turn 1 Battlefield Forge into Norn the Wary, right? I'm playing Norn Sisters, right? Like, that's almost certainly what I'm going to be playing. Now, your opponent is going to know exactly what to do to be able to try and get out of that, right? So, like, they might lose the first match, but they're going to go to sideboarding, and basically they know everything that you're going to try and play, right? Same thing, like, if you were playing, I don't know, like Burn. If your opponent has a white deck, they're probably going to have Leyline of Sanctity, and then they're gonna know to put that in. And if you don't have a way to get out of that, then you're just screwed. So, anyways, it's kind of tough sometimes, because when you're playing just these archetypes, your opponent does know what you have, or what your game plan is, and it is like they know how to disrupt it, or they usually know how to disrupt it. Okay. The other thing is that just because a person is playing one of these pre-constructed internet decks or internet decklist decks, it doesn't mean that they're not creative or skilled, right? Like, sometimes people, like, I've seen people attack me even in the chat again and say, like, hey, can't you be creative, or, why you have to take other people's ideas? Well, okay, first of all, not everybody can have their own, like, unique deck. If there's like 10 million players, let's say even if there's like 1,000 players, are there really 1,000 unique decks there that are all competitive? Probably not. It's not like you're calling dibs on a deck and then no one else can use that. So I think that would, although that would be kind of interesting, but, it would make Magic, I think, just suck, because, one person would get one deck and then everyone else would have to play kind of an inferior version of that. But, the thing is, like, yes, sometimes I'll play like a Relentless Rats or Mill or Burn. Never mind, I never play Burn casually. But like, so, I'll play decks like that. But, I do have a ton of other homebrews that I've put together myself that are actually quite good, like my Puka Trade deck that I really like. Incidentally, Puka Trade works really well in multiplayer. But like, like my Sleeper Agent deck or things like that I've put together that no one else really plays. Like, those are interesting deck ideas. They're not like super, super, super competitive. They're not tier 1. You're not going to win Grand Prix with them, but they are really fun. And it doesn't mean that I'm not competitive because I play Mill sometimes. Or it doesn't mean I'm not creative because I don't play Mill. And even if I'm not creative, who cares? Not everybody has the time to sit there and pore over the cards, to be able to just figure out a new deck. So I don't think that that's a problem, for someone to actually go online and look and see, like, look for a deck that they really like. Okay, like, for instance, I recently introduced like 4 or 5 people to the game of Magic, as per my last video, and every single one of them like chose, like, kind of latched onto a different type of archetype. Like, one of them, I gave them basically a modified version of the modern event deck, and they really liked it. They really enjoyed playing that black-white tokens type deck, where it's this go wide type strategy. That's just them. They really liked it. Another player saw they're playing blue-white control with tokens, and they saw me play Norn Sisters, and they're like, that's the deck I love. And I was like, well, it's a good deck, but it's not like tier 1 competitive. And they're like, I don't care. That's, I really like that deck a lot. That's my style. And I'm like, great. Like, if that's your style, then play that style. Like, the whole point of the game is to have fun. So anyways, like, just because that person, likes Norn Sisters doesn't mean they weren't able to create something else. Like, their blue-white token deck was actually really strong, and it was really just, like, kind of their homebrew as well. So, I think people sometimes just kind of jump to some conclusions about people, who are playing these internet decks. And let's face it, how many people are really playing a deck completely of their own construction? All right, anyway, so I just want to finish off with just some rules that I generally have for these, for kind of casual play. And basically, it all comes down to one thing. It's just, is everyone having fun? So the first thing is, don't play a tier 1 deck against a casual deck, right? So if you've got Jund or Lantern Control or Death Shadow aggro, and your opponent's playing, like, your buddy's playing, like a dual deck or a beginner deck or starter deck or whatever, like, out of the box, don't play against them with that. That's not, it's not a good matchup. You're not really going to have any fun because your opponent, and I guess if you are having fun, it's not very nice, but your opponent is not going to have fun. And if people aren't having fun, they're going to drop the game. So you want to choose something that's actually competitive. When I play against the people I've brought new to the game, often I'll ask them, like, what are you playing? Right? Like, and they're like, well, I don't want to tell you. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not asking you to get an advantage over you. Like, I'm asking you to get an idea of how powerful your deck is so that I can choose like one of my decks to play against you that's equally competitive. And usually I'll choose one that's less competitive, so it's more difficult for me to win. So I'm kind of an underdog in that race. It's not I'm not trying to get information so I can blow them out of the water. Right? So anyways, another thing is, don't be smug. Right? No one likes that. When you beat someone, you're like, ha ha, I beat you. You suck, or you should have done this, or you should have done that. Like, no one really likes that. If you have some real advice, like, for instance, you might say, like, look, you tried to burn out this, but this is really the actual threat on the board. Next time you should maybe look at this one instead. Like, maybe they'd appreciate that. But in general, like, no one likes someone who's just sitting there smug. So anyways, don't expect to win just because you have a strong deck. This bothers me a lot, right? Like, a lot of times I've noticed, like, for instance, I'll be playing Sleeper Agent or, something like that, like Liquid Metal Destruction, and I'll play against like Death Shadow aggro or something, and I'll get like basically a good roll on them. And, a lot of you guys have noticed, like, when something like Liquid Metal Destruction or my Defender's deck or, Sleeper Agent gets kind of rolling, it gets kind of really oppressive. It's really hard to break out of it. Right, so then a person will be playing Death Shadow aggro or Jund or 8-rack or something like that, and then they just get mad and then they drop the game. Right? I'm like, well, okay, just because you have a strong deck doesn't mean that you're going to win all the time. No deck in Magic the Gathering wins all the time. Right? And sometimes you just get mana screwed or mana flooded, or even if you have a strong deck, your opponent's deck might not be, like, it might not matter, right? So, like, it might not affect them. Like, they might just be a good matchup. That's what I'm trying to say. They might just be a good matchup against you. Right? So, like, a good example was when I played Elves. Like, so my opponent was playing Elves and I was playing Hunted Orb, and they dropped down a Crater Hoof Behemoth. But Hunted Orb, the Torpor Orb, stops the Crater Hoof Behemoth's ETB trigger, and so basically they weren't able to get any triggers off of that. Same thing with Dwynen's Elite. It wasn't making any tokens and so on and so forth. Like, it's just like kind of a bad matchup for them. Right? So anyways, don't expect to win, all the time. Even I think probably the top decks, like, only have like maybe a 65 or 70% win ratio. Like, even then they lose like a third of the time. All right. So anyways, another thing I thought of is understand that the value of cards can go up or down at any time. So this is one thing I think a lot of people get frustrated in, is that they see their cards as an investment. And in a way they are, because you buy cards and they cost money and then they retain their value so later on you could sell them. But some people, they buy cards hoping that they're going to just skyrocket in value. So they'll buy like, I don't know, like Aether Vial or something like that, and then they're hoping it'll go up to like $200 and then just sell it, right? Like, that's very rare, right? Like, that rarely ever happens. If it does, then great, but like, very few people can afford to buy, like a whole crap ton of Lilianas at $90 each, hoping that it's going to go back up to 150 or something like that, or buying Tarmogoyfs, and then hoping it goes up to $200 again or something like that. Like, sometimes the prices of cards are going to go up and down just depending on what people are playing and depending on the releases and stuff like that. Whatever money you put into there is good that you can get some of it back. But remember, this is a hobby. If you're wanting to actually get money out of it, then you're probably better off just investing in the stock market, right? Like, you can make way more money in the stock market than you're going to be making in Magic the Gathering. So don't treat it as, an investment tool. All right. Now, this last thing I want to say, and I think this is by far the most important, and I think getting back to what I started with Desolator Magic and stuff like that, is Wheaton's Law, is don't be a dick, right? That's really it. Just don't be a dick. Like when you basically that goes back to almost everything I said is don't be smug. Smug people are dicks. Like don't chastise your opponent. Don't just drop the game or flip the table or whatever, right? Like just have fun. Like recently I was playing, Lantern Control against another blue control deck, and I was controlling the hell out of them. They beat me in the first match. I beat them in the second match. We got to round 3, and I complimented them. I was like, you're playing really well. And at the very end, like I was down to like 8 cards. I made a bad decision on milling, and they ended up getting a Snapcaster. Because they got a Snapcaster, they were able to like flashback all my. I think they had an Echoing Truth and like flashback all my ensnaring bridges back to my hand and swung in their creatures and beat me. And I was like, that's amazing. That was a great top deck. And, it's just, I could have made a different decision, but I didn't. I was like, you got me. And he's like, oh, I almost thought I lost. And, you can tell everyone's having fun. That's how sometimes what happens. Another time, like I was playing Mill against Burn, and I just happened to mill the person out before they burned me, before they were able to burn me. I was down to like 1 life, and I got a little lucky. I think they just kept on getting lands, but like for a few rounds. But I got lucky, and they're like, hey, good job. You managed to beat me. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know how I did it. So, I mean, when you're like that, everybody has fun playing, and it's just a good experience all around, right? So I think that's just the number one thing is just, be nice, make sure everyone has fun, or try and make sure that people have as much fun as possible, and just don't be a dick. All right. Anyways, so I'm hopefully back for now producing some videos, at least for the next couple months. And, well, I plan on doing still my 1 a week at least, along with some gameplay. If there's a topic you want to hear, or if there's something you'd like to add about, net decks or whatever, throw it into the comments. I really like to hear it. Do you agree? Like, what do you think of people that use these pre-constructed online lists? Anyways, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.